There's a strange pattern in the world of money. Most people think wealth comes from logic, from planning, from following the obvious path. But if you look closer, really look, you start to notice something uncomfortable. A lot of first fortunes don't come from doing what makes sense. They come from doing what looks ridiculous, right up until it works. Let me show you what I mean. Back in the early 2000s, there was a man named Gary Dahl. Now here's the strange part. He didn't invent a new technology. He didn't build a company. He didn't create a product that solved a major problem. He sold rocks. Yes, actual rocks. Smooth stones placed inside small cardboard boxes, complete with air holes and a little instruction manual on how to care for your pet. He called them pet rocks. At first glance, it sounds like a joke, because it was. But here's where things shift. Gary wasn't selling a rock, he was selling humor, conversation, a novelty people could share. And in just a few months, he made over $1 million. His first $100,000 came quickly, almost effortlessly, because he tapped into something most people ignore: emotion. People didn't need the product, they wanted the feeling. Now ask yourself something. How many ideas have you dismissed because they felt too simple, too obvious, too strange? Because the truth is, the market doesn't reward logic. It rewards attention. And sometimes, the fastest way to get attention is to do something nobody else is willing to try. But this isn't a one-off story. Let's go deeper. In the 1990s, a man named Alex Tew was a student trying to pay for university. He didn't have funding. He didn't have connections. What he had was a blank web page. So he came up with a bizarre idea. He would sell pixels, not ads in the traditional sense, not banners. Individual pixels. Each pixel cost $1, and buyers had to purchase a block of at least 10 by 10 pixels. The site was called the $1 Million Homepage. It sounded absurd. Who would pay for pixels on a page? But something interesting happened. People started buying. Why? Because it was unusual, it was different, it created curiosity. The page itself became the product. Within months, Alex sold every pixel. That's $1 million in total. And again, his first $100,000 didn't come from following a proven path, it came from leaning into something strange and committing to it fully. Now here's where most people get it wrong. They think these stories are about luck. They're not. They're about perspective, seeing something others overlook, and then acting on it before doubt creeps in. Because here's the uncomfortable truth most people don't want to hear. Opportunities rarely look like opportunities at the beginning. Sometimes they look like bad ideas. Sometimes they look like distractions. They even look like things you almost ignore. But the people who win, they pause. They look again. And then they move. And that brings us to the next level of this. Because sometimes, the strange idea isn't the opportunity. You are. Let's shift the lens for a moment. Because not every strange path starts with a strange idea. Sometimes it starts with a strange skill, or something that feels completely ordinary, until someone decides to use it differently. Take the story of Fiverr sellers in the early days of the platform. Now, today, Fiverr is a massive global marketplace. But when it first launched, it was almost a joke. Everything was priced at just $5. That was the hook. People were offering things like voiceovers, drawings, video messages, and some truly bizarre services. One man offered to say anything you wanted, while dressed in a costume. Another would write your message on a whiteboard and dance. Strange, right? But here's what happened. These sellers didn't stay at $5, they built demand. They stacked orders, they added upgrades, they increased pricing, and some of them even crossed over $100,000 in earnings from what most people would have dismissed as nonsense. Let that sink in. The thing that looks silly to one person can become a system to another. Now here's something I want you to think about. What do you already know how to do that you've been underestimating? Because the gap between where you are now and your first $100,000 is often smaller than you think. It's not about starting from scratch. It's about seeing what's already there, differently. And before we go any further, I want to pause for a second. If you're watching this and something is starting to click for you, I want you to do something simple. Go into the comments and write, "I see the opportunity now." Not because it sounds good, but because the moment you start recognizing opportunity, everything begins to shift. You stop waiting, you start noticing. And that's when things change. Now let's go deeper again, because sometimes the strange path isn't about selling something. It's about collecting something. There was a man named Rob Walker who ran a fascinating experiment. He bought 200 random objects from thrift stores, small, meaningless items, things most people would ignore. The total cost? Around $130. Then he invited writers to create fictional stories about each object. Simple narratives, nothing complicated. After that, he listed the items on eBay, along with their stories. Now here's where it gets interesting. Those same objects sold for a total of over $8,000, from $130 to $8,000. Why? Because of perception. The objects didn't change. The story did, and the value followed. This is one of the most important lessons in making money that almost nobody talks about. Value is not fixed. It's created. Positioning, storytelling, context. These things shape what people are willing to pay. So again, ask yourself, are you focusing too much on what something is, instead of what it could be? Because the people who reach that first $100,000 often aren't doing more. They're seeing more, and acting on it faster. Now let's take this one step further, because the next story shows something even more powerful. Timing. There's one final layer to all of this, and it's the part most people struggle to understand. Timing. Because sometimes the same idea at the wrong time fails, and at the right time, it explodes. Take the example of domain name investors in the early days of the internet. In the 1990s, people were registering domain names for just a few dollars. Names that seemed obvious in hindsight, but not at the time. Things like business.com, hotels.com, and cars.com. To most people, it looked pointless. Why would a simple web address be worth anything? But a few individuals saw where things were heading. They registered names early, and years later companies came knocking. Some of these domains sold for millions, even smaller, less obvious names sold for tens or hundreds of thousands. That first $100,000? It came from being early, from seeing a shift before the crowd arrived. And here's where this ties everything together, whether it's pet rocks, pixels, Fiverr gigs, storytelling experiments, or domain names. There's a pattern. It's not about chasing money, it's about spotting mispriced attention, something undervalued, something overlooked, something dismissed. And then stepping in before everyone else realizes, because once the crowd arrives, the opportunity is gone. Now here's the question most people avoid. How do you find these opportunities? The answer isn't complicated, but it does require a shift. You have to stop looking for what feels safe and start looking for what feels interesting, curious, slightly uncomfortable, because that's usually where the edge is. And here's the final thought I want to leave you with. The strangest paths often lead the furthest, not because they're easy, but because most people won't take them. Which means less competition, more attention, and a higher chance of a breakthrough. So maybe the idea you've been dismissing, the one that feels a bit different, the one you haven't quite acted on yet, maybe that's the one worth exploring. Because as you've seen today, weird doesn't mean wrong. Sometimes, weird is exactly where the money is. If this video resonated with you, give it a like and subscribe so that we can continue this amazing journey together.